Welcome to chillTV's continuing coverage of the 2020 BC provincial election. I'm Clint Hames, and joining me for this session is Chilliwack Councillor Bud Mercer. Bud's also going to be joining on election evening as my co-host for the events, and we're here tonight just to talk about some of the current realities, and this is almost like a pregame show, giving a little hint of what's to come. No, Bud, the first thing that occurs to me as we start thinking about Saturday and the election is that normally with federal and provincial elections in this part of the world, we seem to know what's going to happen locally. We may not be sure what's going to happen provincially, but we do have a really good sense of what's going to happen locally. And this is the first time in my memory, and I've been paying attention for a lot of years, it's the first time I'm sitting here thinking, I don't really know what's going to happen. And that's been caused by a lot of turmoil within both Chilliwack and Chilliwack-Kent leading up to nominations and certainly during the nomination period. Your thoughts?
Well, turmoil's keeping it interesting, there's no doubt. There's two parts to an election. There's the campaigning and the lead up, and then there's voting day on Saturday. And originally, both of those things, I think, were scheduled and going well, and everything as planned. But everything's kind of fallen apart a little bit. A number of things have happened. We've got Diane Jansen that's moved from a proponent as a Liberal candidate now as a BC Conservative. We've got Jason Lum entering as a late entry as an independent. And we've also got now Laurie Thronis that's been removed from the Liberal seat and is running as an independent. And it brings up all kinds of questions that we're going to talk about. To start, how do we address the issue of people who are diehard Liberal fans in the BC election? The original mail-in ballots were sent out. Many have been filled out and sent in. And many people will have voted for Laurie Thronis, but more about the Liberal Party. So what do we say to them now if he's not a Liberal? Does the vote count? And I don't think Election BC has answered that correctly, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more.
And you bring up a really good point. There was a lot of talk around the time of the mail-in ballots, which is brand new for British Columbia, that said you don't have to put your candidate name in there. You can just identify a party or an independent. Now, when that process started, we had one independent in the riding. Now we have two. So how do those votes get counted? So that's going to be an interesting challenge. On election night, it's going to be an interesting challenge as we move forward because so much has changed in this riding. You brought up Diane Jansen, and that's very interesting. She wanted to run as a BC Liberal and actually challenged, was set to challenge a sitting MLA for the nomination, which is not completely unheard of, but is certainly a very dramatic step. When the party said she couldn't do that, she switched to the Conservative Party. What do you think that's going to do to the election in the Chilliwack riding?
Well, I think we're in a new era, and that opens up a whole different chapter in this discussion as to Chilliwack. When we look at Chilliwack, as we know factually, Chilliwack is a growing community. Lots of new young people moving into our area that are voting, and we have to ask ourselves, what's more important to them? Is it the party or is it the candidate? If it's the party, it's going to be a bit of a problem. If it's the candidate, people like Diane Jansen and Jason Lum who will share their platform and what they think, I think they're going to be successful.
It'll be interesting as this process moves forward on the Saturday to see how that goes. I remember back to 2012, there was a by-election in the community caused when Barry Penner, who was a sitting MLA, said, I'd like to retire. And a Conservative candidate, ironically, who's now a Liberal, running John Martin, running in the Chilliwack riding, announced that he would run as a Conservative. And Laurie Thronis, who's today a candidate, ran as a Liberal. And because they took each other's votes away, the NDP candidate of the day was successful, which was the first time in modern history that a New Democrat had been elected in this riding. We have the potential for that in the Chilliwack riding in the situation with Diane Jansen running. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I look at it a couple of different ways. I often heard, especially when I ran, that when you were an incumbent, it was kind of yours to lose. That's kind of the philosophy that was shared with me. But I think the voters in Chilliwack, they're smart and they are astute. And one of the handicaps, if you will, that an incumbent has is it's not about what I will do for you, it's about what I have done for you. So these two candidates over the last while, and especially over this week as we lead up to Saturday night, are really going to have to be clear of what have they done for the city of Chilliwack. What's their track record? How have they made Chilliwack better? For the people that are running for the first time, it's more about what I want to do for you, what I will do for you, and what I can do for you. So it's going to be an interesting election.
Let's talk a little bit about Chilliwack-Kent now, where we have an odd situation. Liberal candidate Laurie Thronis made some comments at an all-candidates meeting. He was held to task for those comments and kicked out of the Liberal Party or resigned from the Liberal Party as a result of those comments, which means that we don't have a Liberal running in the riding. We have two independents, New Democrat and others, which is going to make it very interesting. Do you see that this is Laurie Thronis's to lose even without the party affiliation, or do you think that's thrown it into a wide open situation?
I think it's wide open for a number of reasons. Jason Lum is very well known and very well loved in this community. He's been part of the community for a long, long time. He's a several-term councillor in Chilliwack. I know from traveling with him to meetings, you sit by Jason and they're looking at Jason, not at you. He's a very liked young man. I think the other thing that will bother the electorate a little bit, I still hear about it, is why are we having a provincial election at this time during a COVID crisis? And I think that's something that any Democratic candidate is going to have to overcome.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. When the election was announced, there was a lot of chatter on social media about, an unnecessary election and why are we having this? So I did a little informal poll on social media and said, number one, does this change how you'll vote in the provincial election? And number two, does this mean you might consider not voting because you're mad an election's been called? And I must have, and it's unofficial, of course, but I must have had 100 replies. Not one person said it would change the way they'd vote, and not one person said that they wouldn't vote as a result of the snap election. So I think people were angry about it, but I don't think they're angry enough to say, well, I used to vote New Democrat and now I'm not going to because they've called this election. I think it's given fodder for the candidates to say, why are we having an election in the middle of a pandemic? But I'm not sure, in my opinion, I'm not sure it's going to change much in terms of the way people approach.
Well, we're gonna see. It was either a good strategy or a real bad strategy on the part of the premier. You've got Dr. Bonnie Henry, who is the kind of the national gem, if you will, in the lead up. Everybody looked to Bonnie Henry as the model for the public health officers across the country. And some would say that our premier's riding on her coattails. So I hope that strategy, or we'll see if that strategy works rather for him.
Yes, it's going to be interesting. So we are still in the grips of a pandemic. Maybe a couple of thoughts from you on what you think the province has done well and what you think perhaps the NDP has to be held accounted for in this election.
Well, I think, when you look across the country, and God forbid you look at what's happening to the south of us, Dr. Henry has been the model of what a public health officer should be. And the government, in my view, has behaved accordingly. They followed the science. They took her lead. I don't believe that anything that I've heard or am privy to in my role as a city council would lead me to believe that any decisions were political. They were based on best advice of the scientific and the medical community. So I think from that perspective, I think everything that was done right. If I had a criticism, it would only be that maybe we could have started just a little bit earlier. I think it took a little bit of time for the momentum to gain. The seriousness of what we were facing became more of a reality and more to light. But man, that's looking in retrospect. I think in BC we've done a pretty good job, and so has the government.
Well, let me lean on your position of city councilor. What's the city of Chilliwack looking to get out of this provincial election? We're going to go into a new government. It may be the same government, but it'll be a new term for that government. They may or may not have a bigger mandate, or it may be an entirely different government. We don't know. What's the city of Chilliwack looking to get out of this provincial election? Where do you think we should be following?
Well, I think from my chair, my past chair is the chief of police here, and other roles I've had in policing and the RCMP. I kind of look through a little bit of a different lens, and maybe I'll stay there just for a second. We still have a crisis on our streets when it comes to drugs, when it comes to overdoses, when it comes to the homelessness rate, the poverty rate, drug addiction, and crime. And I think if you were to canvass people in Chilliwack, which we have from the city side, that still remains one of the number one issues for the citizens of Chilliwack. And I've yet to see a plan come from this provincial government on how we're going to make that right. What we have seen, in fairness to the government, is great investment in public and low rental housing, care housing for the addicted and for the homeless. I got to give them that. They're doing a great job here in Chilliwack. But the piece that's missing is the treatment and the intervention. And just very recently, the province released, I think, 10 acute care teams. They're called ACT teams across the province. And believe it or not, Chilliwack did not get one. Yet when it comes to the number of addiction and deaths by overdose in the province, we rank right near the top. But for political reasons, in my view, we did not receive one of those damn teams. Yes, and that's wrong.
As I recall, I think there were 7 teams announced, 3 of them on Vancouver Island. Maple Ridge, a couple in Vancouver, and Kelowna were the communities that received those ACT teams. And I know it's something that the city's lobbied for heavily. So hopefully that'll be something that candidates can stand up for. If elected in Chilliwack, and go to Victoria and say, hey, these are the things we need.
Yeah, and from the incumbents, I'd like to hear what they've done for us. I'd like for them to sit in front of the camera, look at it, and say, in the last years in my seat, this is what I have accomplished for my riding. And I don't think I've quite heard that clearly yet.
Well, I think I've had the opportunity to interview a number of candidates, including both incumbents, and I did ask that question. Well, I asked it in a slightly different way. I said, what are the things that you're the most proud of? When you come back to the riding, what can you look at and say, these are things that I accomplished? And one of the candidates, John Martin, said that what gave him the most pride in the work that he did was working with people in the community and solving problems of people that come to the office. And he said it's one of the things that gave him the most pleasure. And Laurie Thronis pointed to a few of the projects that had been accomplished, the Vetter Bridge, the Lickman Overpass, things like that they're pointing to. But I think I join with a number of people in the community, and yourself included, to say, one of the benefits of having a stable riding politically is that those people are always there and they're going to work for you. One of the downsides of having that kind of political stability is when you're not a riding that's in play for the government, you can be ignored pretty easily. And I would say this one aspect of having a very uncertain election coming up is the fact that perhaps in the future the riding, it will be difficult to ignore the riding because it's kind of moved into a category where it's uncertain what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Laurie Thronis, it wasn't the party in power, but for Mr. Martin it was. But tell me about the Trans-Canada Highway. Where's Chilliwack in the schedule? How many long weekends do we have to sit in traffic for 2 hours waiting for it to come through here? The twinning of the highway, where is it going to stop? I've heard so many stories, can't get a straight answer from that, frustrating. In a recent discussion with the infrastructure minister for nationally, federally, that question was asked of him. And his response was simple. I got lots of money. All the province has to do is to come up with their share and we'll get it done. We'll see.
So it's going to be an interesting night, and it's going to chart what I think will be a very interesting future for the community. I hope we'll have some results to talk about on Saturday night, but there was an overwhelming number of votes that were cast by mail, so we may not have those counted right away. Hopefully we'll get some trends that we can talk about, and hopefully we can continue this discussion as we watch results to come in on that night. Just remind folks, we're going to be joined on that evening by Scott Fast, who's a professor emeritus from the University of Fraser Valley, and people in this part of the world know Scott as one of the most knowledgeable people about local government politics and provincial politics, so it'll be interesting to hear his insight. We're also going to have Don Lane on with hourly or half-hourly updates on what's happening. We're going to have special guests. We have Willow Reichelt, who is a current member of the Chilliwack School Board. John Less, a former mayor, former MLA, who's always got lots of great opinions that we can listen to. And who am I missing? Kelly Velonis, who was, of course, a federal Liberal candidate for this riding, and again, a person who's very plugged into politics and certainly have a lot of good insight for us. So I hope that you'll join Bud and I and all of those guests on Saturday night, October 24th. We're going to be on the air at 7:30. Do a little preamble, go over some of the things that have occurred this week and make sure we've got everything tied up and ready to go. And then at 8 o'clock, hopefully we'll be getting results in. We'll have guests, and we hope that you'll enjoy watching on October 24th. Thanks so much for now. On behalf of chillTV and all of our great sponsors, we hope you'll tune in then.